Graham Matthews made a video quite a while ago, hi Graham, about 10 books that I want to read before I die. It had just really great energy, even though that sounds kind of morbid. And basically the idea is, as readers, we tend to collect books that we're very excited about, that we definitely want to read, but that we don't for one reason or another. And that book sits on our shelves, and we look at it, and we feel guilty, and we try not to look at it too much. But we still really want to read it. And this is sort of, by making this list, making yourself accountable, saying, all right, this is a book I really want to read. By making this list, I'm sort of saying I just kind of have to find time at some point to read all these books. Maybe not right away. I certainly couldn't read them right away. But definitely to put an effort in to make this list disappear and maybe make a new list. So here's that list for me. I loved Graham's video. Please go check it out. I'm going to link it. It's a little older now. It's been a minute, but I think it's really great. I love his energy. Really like the stuff he does. I've just been away for a little while. John Milton's Paradise Lost. This is in no particular order, by the way. Always wanted to read Paradise Lost. Absolutely love Dante's Inferno. This is definitely something else that somebody who likes the Inferno I know would probably like Paradise Lost. This is not just Paradise Lost. This is a whole bunch of other stuff too. And I'm not certain that this would be the exact way that I would read Paradise Lost. But it's one of those books that I know that I would probably really like. And I actually think it's a poem, or is it an epic poem, or I don't know. It doesn't matter. But I want to read it. It's one of those things that you just I haven't done it. I know it's going to be a certain amount of extra effort, right? It's not going to be something you just go, oh yeah, I read Paradise Lost yesterday. No big deal. Like, you have to slow down, take your time, think about it. And I guess I sort of like, don't want to commit that much to it. It's like, well, this is so much easier for me to read. I could just read this. I could just listen to this book or something while I'm driving. And it's like, I know that Paradise Lost would not be that way. For some reason, Paradise Lost has just never been read by me, and I want to change that. I was a huge fan of Arthurian legend when I was young, and just absolutely loved it. And I still do, honestly. Two of the selections on here have to do with Arthurian stuff. But when I was young, I read this book, read the series, and I absolutely loved it. But even though I loved it, I hesitate and have hesitated for a long time to call it one of my favorites, because I read it when I was so young that I'm not certain I can trust my reading. And I really feel like I need to read it as an adult. And that's T.H. White's Once and Future King. Kind of like a deconstruction, in a sense, of the myth, because the characters are portrayed very realistically, with real problems, and not idealized. I can't really explain it. Maybe the closest thing I can think of is maybe like some of Larry McMurtry's Westerns. Or for a science fiction example, maybe think of Frederick Pohl's Gateway, right? Very, very much like a somewhat unflattering, but not necessarily a poor or negative portrayal. The characters are still characters you love, but you're seeing how real people would be if they're put in those mythic roles. I remember it being really wonderful, but since I read it as a kid, I just don't know if I 100% trust that reading. So definitely a book I want to reread before I don't have a chance to reread it anymore. We'll just say it like that. Maybe the only nonfiction book, although I guess somebody who could really debate whether it's nonfiction or not, but I don't think that we're going to try and explore that right now. And I think the biggest reason I haven't read this is because of how much time I know it's going to take, even though I know it would be probably very rewarding. And that's Herodotus's The Histories by Herodotus. This is the landmark edition I bought years ago. It's all annotated with maps and all that kind of stuff. It's really a wonderful book. So it would make a reading of it much easier and probably very rewarding. I just haven't done it. I don't know why. I also have the Landmark Thucydides. I also have that, and which looks really great. I really like ancient history, and this is kind of like you should really read this. Oh yeah, I really should. I just haven't. So I'm looking forward to read this. That's it. I don't know what this next book is, but this book, I want to read this one too. And it's Myron Peake's The Gormenghast novels. This is a fantasy series. I think I discovered this or found out about it because of China Melville. I read China Melville's Perdido Street Station, which I really need to reread and talk about. And he said that one of the inspirations for that story was this series of novels by Peake. I guess you could say it's sort of like a bit like Charles Dickens. The writing style is a little bit like that. Very long-winded, like off-topic, sort of tangent, sort of going narrative. You know, it just goes off in one direction for a while before it comes back, which I kind of like. You know, I guess there's another example on here of a very windy writer. I kind of enjoy that, especially if they're really good. I know I've read some Nathaniel Hawthorne before that I really liked. I want to say that I liked The Scarlet Letter, even though most people didn't. I really think that I liked The Scarlet Letter because of the windiness of it, because it would just go way over in left field and bring it all back, and I just kind of like that. So there's a bit of that in here. I really enjoy Peake's writing. I discovered him in a short story collection that I've mentioned before. I'm not going to mention again because I've told myself I need to stop doing that. But just a really fun and interesting writer. It's a really fun book. I've read about maybe half of the first book, and it was just, I don't know, the time or whatever, I just wasn't into it, and I could tell that my energy wasn't right. So I just, okay, you know, the last thing I want to do is read something that I know that I would probably like at the wrong time. So I stopped, and that was quite a while ago, and I just have never gotten back to it, even though I know I want to read this book. In fact, I've had this book for, God, maybe more than 15, or definitely more than 15 years. Probably more than, I've had this book for 20 years. Yeah, and I haven't read it. So yeah, it's been a long time. They actually have a hardback version I might pick up as well for a very reasonable, or I've seen it, very reasonable price. I don't know how good the binding is. Although I have a couple of the disparate individual volumes, because I think this is 3 volumes. I think there's a 4th unfinished volume also. I have a couple of them in hardback, but I don't think I have them all. Maybe I'd hunt those down instead. I don't know. But Myron Peake, the Gormenghast novels. Like I said, I can like windy writers, and a writer that I really enjoy, who I want to read more of, and I specifically want to read this book because it's maybe one of his better known books that I haven't read, and that's William Faulkner and The Sound and the Fury. I really enjoy Faulkner's style. It can kind of do this thing where it just goes off way out over in one direction and comes way back. I started this novel a long time ago and liked it, but found it a little difficult because Faulkner has a sort of, or at least I've seen sometimes he'll make heavy use of sort of like sounds or like phrases and sort of repeat them almost in like a chant or something. And then also, I believe that it's Faulkner who has that, I think it's the story The Bear. It has like a run-on sentence that goes like 2 or 3 pages. Forgive me if I'm wrong about that, but I believe that that's a Faulkner story, and I believe that's what it happens. And I kind of like that. I kind of think it's kind of fun, especially because Faulkner can usually pull that kind of stuff off. I generally have really enjoyed a lot of the things that I've read of him. Usually focuses on sort of poor Southern families around the Depression era, I think. My goodness, I hope I'm right. I've enjoyed a lot of Faulkner that I've read in the past, and this is one of his major works that I just haven't read. I really enjoyed As I Lay Dying, and I might reread that one first because, but this is one that has been patiently waiting for me for quite a while. And the other Arthurian book that I haven't read, although I've read excerpts of it, I've never truly read it, is Morte D'Arthur by, let me see if I can remember who it is by. No, I cannot offhand. Gosh dang it, Morley. I remembered it as soon as I started to look at it. Morley, Sir Thomas Morley. I believe it's really, Morley didn't really write it. He like collected it, I think, from various bits of story while he was in prison, I think. And this is one of those things that I really wanted to read. I bought this book and said, I'm going to read it right away. I've had this book for 10 years. So right away is a loose definition. Surprisingly, I have not read this, even though I think it's one of those things where I'm holding out like it's a treat, but I have never read the Aeneid. I have read excerpts of it. I have read summaries of it. I generally know the story of it, but I have not read the Aeneid. Please forgive me. This is pretty high up on the list. This is probably, if I was going to read one this year, if I only had one to read this year, this is probably going to be the one. I've been, this book, like every time I come down in this room, this book looks at me and gives me a look like, and I'm like, I mean, this, every time. I think that I'm going to try and push myself very hard to try and make this happen this year. I really love Larry McMurtry's writing. That would lead someone to think that I've read everything he's written. No, I have not. And there's one glaring and rather glaring omission to his catalog that I haven't read, and I have never read Lonesome Dove. For the big reason I haven't read this is that this version, when I got it, billed this as book 3 of 4. And so I read the first book, and I got halfway through the second book, and something happened, and I got distracted and didn't get back, even though I've read lots of McMurtry since then. I thought, you know, this is kind of how the book was billed. Like, oh, this is book 3. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'll read the first 2. I think what is really meant by that with the marketing, because it's changed, I noticed recently when looking this book up, that now Lonesome Dove is book 1. And that's book like 3 or 2 or something else. I don't remember what. I think it's book 4, maybe. I don't remember. And it was just very funny to me. In the timeline of the characters, it comes first. And that's how they were trying to publish it, which I honestly don't like. I prefer to read books as they were chronologically written. So I would normally not read, even if this book is supposed to be the middle of the character's life, and then this other book is the beginning. Oh, you should read the beginning. I'm like, well, no, I'll read it the way it was written. He wrote this book first. That's how I'll read it. That's usually I prefer it. So I'll probably just go straight to Lonesome Dove. I think before I let myself read another McMurtry novel, this will have to be the next one that I read by him. No exceptions made. I mentioned this writer in another video. I've read some of his work and have really enjoyed it, but I would like to read a considerable amount more, and that's something I plan on doing probably sooner than later. If there's the other writer I would probably want to focus on and read this year for another book that'll come up later, is Jorge Luis Borges. I recently heard someone else pronounce his name and thought, oh, maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm going to say Borges until somebody tells me bad. You should also, I should point out, anytime you hear me pronounce something, there is one of two things that is happening. Anything you ever hear me pronounce. Either I've heard somebody else say it that way, and I'm trying to mimic them, or I'm wrong. I have never, ever deduced the proper way to say anything by reading it. Somewhat came up in the pronunciation of Past Master, the main planet, Astrobe. I'm totally off subject, sorry. Astrobe, that's how it's said in the audiobook, Astrobe. And then I heard somebody say Astrobe or Astrobe or something. I don't know. I say Astrobe because that's what the audiobook said. And I thought, cool, thank you. Because otherwise, who knows what I would have said. It would have been embarrassing, is all I can tell you. So, I've heard someone say, I must imagine, Jorge Luis Borges, and that's how I'm going to say it. Magical realism writer. Really fascinating stuff. Definitely, this is the way to bill it, right? If you are a fan of Gene Wolfe's work, you'll probably be interested in trying out Borges. I can't tell you a great story to read per se, because I'm not well enough read in Borges, but I recommend checking him out, and this is a really great way to check him out. He's a very interesting character. There's a person. He writes very interesting stories. There's a really great video. I will link it. It's a he must be a college professor. At least I think he's a college professor, and he gives these sort of like videotapes his classes sometimes and puts them online. At least I think it's college. I guess it looks like college students. And he had a really great video discussing Borges that may or may not be something you're interested in. I'll link it. Although I do not like linking things, because then it seems like it's just another chore to do before I can be done with the video. But in any event, Jorge Luis Borges, really excellent writer. I've enjoyed everything I've read by him. Some very strange stuff, very, I would say, experimental, and I think that's probably fair. And Ursula K. Le Guin even compares Gene Wolfe to Borges, saying that Wolfe is our own homegrown Borges. He's an American Borges, essentially. This is probably the other one, the Aeneid and and Borges are the ones I have my sights set on in the year, and then probably Lonesome Dove too. I think that was 9. That was 9, and I don't really know that I want to do the 10th one. I was kind of like, maybe I'll stop at 9, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. I don't own a copy of this book. And I almost didn't include it because I felt like I was being pretentious by even saying, it seems almost pretentious in a sense to sort of mention reading it. And that seems pretentious for me to say that. However, I do have interest in it, and I want to read it because I'm just interested in it. And that's Proust's Swan's Way. Honestly, I don't know very much about it. Usually when I get interested in a book like that, I get interested, I do a little bit of looking into it, and I say, okay, and then it sort of like has checked the box of, yes, I would like to read this at some point, and then I just stop, cold turkey, and do nothing else with the book. I don't look up anything more about it, I don't look up anything more about the writer, nothing. And then I go right into the story, and then when eventually I get to the story, I read it, with almost, generally I've forgotten every reason that I wanted to read it. You know, I just know that like a previous version of myself recommended it to me. That's how I kind of think about it. Sort of what happened. I know I looked into it and got interested in Swan's Way. I thought, okay, yes, I think I want to read this. So my interest in it, it really just comes from a place of, it piqued my interest, and I feel like there's something there that I would probably enjoy, or at least I'd like to try it. I know it's I think it's supposed to be a bit challenging, but that's not really the reason I haven't. I just think that I know it's going to require a more dedicated amount of effort. And, you know, that means other things have to be cleared out of the calendar so I can really pay attention. But it's something I want to do. That was the 10 books. I think I rambled only a bit. I'm going to do a short book review, I guess. I found out that this book was a movie. It was a silent film, and got interested in it honestly because of the title. And then when I read about it, I thought, well, that sounds really interesting. I liked it, but I had some issues with it, which is why it's really not going to make its own video. I hesitate to really recommend it even, because I feel like most people won't make it through the book. I think I had a little bit of difficulty making it through the book, and that's Dorothy Scarborough's The Wind. Copyright 1925. Originally, she published it without her name on it, because she was afraid of the negative reaction, because it was critical of Texas, which I find a little unusual because it doesn't seem to be very critical of Texas to me. But I guess at the time it might have been critical of Texas, because it doesn't paint Texas in a the state, not the people of Texas. Not like its society or like how its government or anything like that. It paints the sort of very pioneer-esque time period of Texas in a unfavorable light, right? It seems like it makes it a place that you don't want to visit. And I really liked what it did at the very beginning of the book. In fact, the opening chapter I thought was absolutely astounding, and that's why I'm definitely going to read this book. And I liked it, and I liked what the second chapter did. And then it just sort of kind of got a bit boring, and it did some stuff at the end, but it felt a bit tedious to me at times. The ending felt a little bit, I don't know, it felt a little unsatisfying. In fact, I would say the middle of the book definitely dragged, and the ending was a bit unsatisfying, honestly. But what really attracted me to this book, what I thought was really fascinating, was the opening chapter talks about how the wind is like this, almost like a living entity, and that it drives women in the West insane. And this is not a fantasy book by any means, right? It's portraying the West in Texas, and it really focuses on how the wind is almost like a supernatural force. And this young woman, very young, I want to say she's 16 or 18, her mother dies, and she has to go live with her cousin in Texas because there's no one else, no other relatives in Virginia, I think. The words that Dorothy Scarborough uses to describe this train ride into Texas is like someone, like a person entering into this alien landscape that they, and just sort of this like utter shock at how everything is deadly and dangerous. It feels surreal, honestly. That's the second chapter, though. The first chapter just goes on at length about how the wind drives people, how the wind drives women crazy, especially because, and I think Dorothy Scarborough says, because women represent sort of a settling down, sort of establishing civilization. They represent that, and the wind is wild and free and crazy, and it doesn't like women for that reason, and women are driven crazy by it. I don't know if that's actually factual or not, but I want to say that I've heard that in other completely separate references, some other place, but maybe they were derived from here, and I didn't know it. Really like that. Those first 2 chapters were great. In fact, if you were interested, I'd recommend reading the first 2 chapters of the book, and then you can just say, okay, the rest of it is sort of mundane. The main characters, Letty, sort of adapting to trying to live in Texas and the struggles that she goes through and everything. And it's not a bad novel, but it's not very exciting. It certainly doesn't really ever achieve what it began in those first 2 chapters. So I liked it, and I would recommend it to somebody who's interested and who can endure what I found was like very repetitive scenes. I really felt like maybe this could have been about half as long and probably done the exact same thing with almost no difference, because there were definitely segments where I felt like the things were just being repeated. It's like, okay, all this text is really just saying what you've already said, and nothing new is really happening. But I did enjoy her writing style, although I think sometimes she leaned too heavily on the same imagery and using it over and over again. Let me see if I can find a good selection, because actually, like I said, some of the stuff in here is really great and maybe worth checking out. So I guess I'll read a little. Hi, I got my glasses on. I'll read a little. I'll read a little excerpt out of this to show you what I mean. It's so goofy. What the hell's wrong with me? To kind of show what I mean, because I think it's really neat. And I think that maybe if you're interested, it's worth maybe finding a free version online and reading the first 2 chapters, maybe. After that, take it or leave it. I will say that I felt that those first 2 chapters were the best part of the book, and that the rest of it was interesting if you're really interested in the kind of fiction that it presents, but maybe not absolutely fascinating. As another just sort of side note, this was a banned book at one time. I don't believe it is anymore. It's not very... does not present a very damning sort of presentation of Texas, which so I kind of found it weird that it was ever banned. But I guess it was like, don't say anything negative about Texas. She eventually did republish this book with her name on it, so I guess that she was able to feel secure in that. It seems like it's very fortunate that women have often found that they could not publish something without withholding the fact that they are women. I guess we still deal with that now, don't we? In the old days, the winds were the enemies of women. Did they hate them because they saw in them the symbols of that civilization which might gradually lessen their own power? Because it was for women that men would build houses, as once they made dugouts, would increase their herds, would turn the unfenced pastures into farms, furrowing the land that had never known the touch of plow since time began, stealing the sand from the winds. The winds were cruel to women that came under their tyranny. They were at them ceaselessly buffering them with icy blasts in winter, burning them with hot breath in summer, parching their skins, roughening their hair, and trying to wear down their nerves by attrition and drive them away. And the sand was the weapon of the winds. It stung the face like bits of glass, it blinded the eyes, it seeped into the houses through cracked windows and doors, and made it through every crack and crevice, so that it might make beds harsh to lie on, might make the food gritty to taste, the air stifling to breathe. It piled in drifts against the fence or any obstruction, as deep as snow after a northern blizzard. That whole first, intro, which is about 2 pages, is like that. And it's just wonderful writing. And it made me read the rest of the book. I just wish the rest of the book had paid off on that description. It captured my imagination so amazingly. And that train ride that Letty has going into Texas, from being from Virginia, where it was very green and lush and full of life, and here everything is dying, and the rabbits are monstrously huge, and these trees that look like fruit-bearing trees do nothing. They're just like, oh yeah, those things are everywhere, whatever, it was just so fascinating because she just kept, like, every time she looked for something, it was like denied. You know, the cows here were withered and looked like, you know, almost skeletal, and they weren't fenced in. They were just, you know, running wild and just walking around, and they'd get onto the tracks and the train would hit one and kill it, and she's crying because of that. And the stranger she encounters in the train is sort of has this slightly predatory air, obviously much older, and you're like, well, yeah, she's like very young and very vulnerable, and you kind of get nervous for her. Just fantastic. Those first were very ratcheting up of tension, and I didn't. The rest of the novel didn't pay off what I hoped it would, but I still like it. I recommend it ultra cautiously. By modern standards, it probably would seem boring, and I felt like it was the narrative was repetitive. I feel like sections could be pared down, and it would make a much more successful novella than it would a novel. Good purchase. And then also I picked this particular rather beat up one, and I do kind of like beat up books anyways. You know, and I kind of thought, well, I'll show my wife. You know, I was like, do you think I should get this version or just this one? And she's like, oh, get this one, because it has photos from the silent film, The Wind, which I think is also in. I don't know if it's in the public domain or not now, also, but it does have some stills from it. I thought that was a nice touch. There's another one. Yeah. There we go. So the first intro section and maybe the first chapter or two are worth your time. After that, it's up to you. Thanks again, Graham. Sorry it took me long. Hope you're doing good. Love your stuff. Great guy. Go check his stuff out. That's it. I'm getting out of here. You go find something fun to do. Best wishes to you. Read a cool book. Let me know if you're reading something cool. If you got something cool, let me know about it. I like hearing about stuff. I like books. You like books. That's why you're here. We all like books. Books are the best. Book. Bye.